Hi, and welcome to my channel. I know that I've been gone for a while. As you may or may not have heard, I just moved across the country in the last couple of weeks, and it's been pretty crazy, as moves tend to be. I also have a traumatic brain injury that I got in 2017, and I knew that the move would be hard on my brain injury symptoms, but there were some unforeseen circumstances that were out of my control that have led to me being increasingly debilitated by symptoms these last couple of weeks. So unfortunately, I haven't had any time or energy to make any videos until today, but I'm excited to be back and making a video about receiving feedback. I know that giving feedback is also important, but today I'm just going to focus on receiving feedback. So what is feedback, right? If we think about it from a scientific perspective, right, feedback loops are when two things come into contact with each other and it sparks some kind of reaction, right? So we get that feedback like when you, plug wires in the incorrect way, and I'm not very, tech savvy, so I don't know how to describe that with right words, but, essentially in a sound system, you get feedback because something's coming into contact with something else. And then that feedback gives us information about what's going wrong in the system. So with other humans, right, we get feedback from people when they come into contact with us and they have some kind of experience, right? That experience could be positive, it could be negative, it could be neutral, and then they give us information about that experience that we're both having together. Some of the components of feedback are delivery, tone, intention, the source, and the context. Right? So we'll start with the context, right? Is this an emergency situation? Is this a university, right? Is this a family member? Like, what is the situation that's going on? That's going to determine what kind of feedback you might be getting, right? So I used to work in a hospital, and there would be times that a code was called, and it wouldn't be necessarily something that I would personally know was happening, but a nurse might suddenly shove me out of the way on her way to a room to go save someone's life, right? And I knew not to take it personally that this nurse was like literally moving me, being like, move out of my way, right? Because ultimately she needed to give feedback in a really fast, effective manner so that she could go do what she needed to do. I would never want a nurse to have to stop and be like, well, if it's okay with you, I need you to move out of the way, because then it's partly my fault that someone died. So, the context of the feedback matters a lot. The source also matters, right? Is this someone that you trust their opinion? Is this someone who is known for having good advice or good, understanding or grips of reality? There are times where you may receive feedback from someone and you may look at it and say, I don't trust the source, so I'm going to examine this feedback a little bit differently. So we can also look at the intention of the feedback. Like, in the case of the nurse, right, the intention is to get information across as fast as possible because she has something else she needs to accomplish. In other situations, you might be prioritizing, preserving the dynamic of the relationship. So you might be very gentle, very kind. You might really take your time in how you give the feedback. You'd probably talk with a soft voice, so there are different times where you're going to use different techniques. And the tone of the delivery of the feedback is going to depend largely on the context and on the situation going on. So the delivery, right, is how you receive the feedback. Is this verbal feedback that you're getting? Was it spoken in person? Was it over the phone? Was it through a text message? Was it nonverbal feedback, like someone giving you a look saying like, ooh, I'm not cool with that? Or sometimes someone's body language might give us feedback even though they're not necessarily trying to overtly communicate something to us. We might be able to pick up on feedback that's being sent through more subtle channels. So all of these different factors come together to help us figure out what it is that we do with feedback. Once upon a time, I myself was not very good at receiving feedback. And I still have days where I'm like, I don't want this feedback. Like, this is not fun for me. But once upon a time, I would take feedback so personally. Anytime someone had something constructive to say, no matter how gentle they were, I would get very upset. I would not be able to hear it well. I certainly wasn't really able to put it into action. And this began to cause a lot of problems for me in my life. It ruined a number of relationships. And so eventually I was like, I need need to work on this. So I started to learn how to receive feedback. So through my experimentation, through, reading books, attending therapy, trying this out with people, I have developed a system that works for me on how to receive feedback. So the step that I do first is to simply receive the feedback, right? So this is like someone walks up to you and hands you a box. Before you know what's in it, you just take the box. You're like, all right, I see that you've handed me this box and I'm going to look inside it and see what's going on. So the first thing to do is, whether you agree or disagree with the feedback, with the content, is to simply acknowledge that the person has given you feedback. And this may sound silly, but ultimately it's really important, because what this does is whether or not you choose to agree with the person, you are letting them know, hey, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate you taking the time to say it. And now I'm going to figure out what I do next. So that's kind of the next step, right? Is you take the feedback in and you consider it, right? You think, is this valid? Is this something that applies to me? And sometimes if it's confusing enough, I may actually take it to another person or other people to run it by them and be like, someone gave me this feedback, but this doesn't sit right with me. Do you perceive that as accurate? What do you think about it? And sometimes that can help you to parse out, yes, this is helpful feedback. I just had this huge blind spot and, I needed this outside information to understand what was going on. Or you might actually say, I heard the feedback that someone gave me, but ultimately I've decided that it kind of came out of left field and really isn't based in reality, and I'm going to choose to ignore it. So in the second step, you mull it over, right? You phone a friend if you have to, and you make a decision of like, do I want to use this feedback? And so that's the third step, is either saying, yes, this feedback is super helpful for me. I'm going to take it in. I'm going to, integrate it into my life. Or, I thanks for giving me feedback, but I'm not really on the same page with this. So I'm actually going to disregard it. Using this 3-part system helps you to have a little space to be able to make decisions. Sometimes when we get difficult feedback, we immediately go to a reactive place where we want to lash out or, end the relationship or say something nasty or cry or hide or whatever it is. Simply acknowledging the feedback and then saying, I'm going to take some time to think about this if you need time, consultation, etc., can be a really great way to give yourself a little bit of breathing room. And then you can make a decision from an informed perspective rather than a rash kind of, this just came at me all of a sudden and now I'm freaking out, right? So try that out, see if it's helpful for you. Let me know if you have your own method that you've devised for receiving feedback, because I know that it's not easy for most of us, right? We get better at it the more we practice it, the more we find ways that work for us, but it's hard sometimes to get feedback that says, hey, you got this thing you need to work on. In closing, I have 2 main tips that I like to use when it comes to receiving feedback. The first one is to not take it personally. This may sound counterintuitive because the feedback is about us. However, I think we can come to a place where we're separating out our actions from our identity, right? Someone may give us feedback about something we're doing, and we may then turn around and interpret that as, oh, they think I'm a bad person, or, something global about us, as instead of them just being like, I wish you just didn't do this thing. Can you just not do that thing? And instead we're over here like, you think I'm a bad friend. And so see what you can do to try and not take it personally, to look at your actions from an objective standpoint in terms of what it is that you can do better. The second tip is to think of feedback as a gift. So a lot of us might go to therapy, right? Like that's most of what therapy is feedback in many different formats, and we pay money for it. So someone might be giving you feedback. They're giving you this gift for free, right? That's freaking awesome. And if it's a scenario where they've given you some really valid feedback that you want to take in, that's amazing. Like use that. That is valuable. That means that they cared enough about you to sit you down and have a talk about something that might actually help your friendship or connection go to the next level. If someone gives you some feedback that's just totally wackadoo, that's also okay. That gives you information about where that person is at and tells you that maybe you guys aren't really connecting in the way that you thought you were, and that it might be time to consider parting ways. So no matter what the content of the feedback is, that information is hella useful and you should definitely take advantage of it. To sum up, Receiving feedback is a really, really helpful thing in life. Do what you can to acknowledge whatever feedback comes your way, to consider it, consult a friend if you need to, and then decide whether or not you plan to use it. Remember not to take things too personally. Remember that it's a gift. Information is a gift, and it's helpful for you to know the things that you didn't already know about yourself. Let me know if this is helpful or if you have other thoughts about receiving feedback. Thanks, and see you next time.